Nick, can you just give me the... Are we right to go? Yep. Okay. It's clear that the Allen Labor government can't manage money, but it's also clear that they're trying to hide the misuse of money, or money that can be avoided in terms of paying taxpayer dollars for things that can be funded elsewhere. News that the Allen Labor government has paid $63 million to Tennis Australia and disclosed that, kept it from the Victorian people, is not acceptable. What we want in Victoria is transparency and scrutiny. And for the government to have made a payment weeks out from the 2022 state election and not told anybody about it is just unacceptable. We know that the Allen Labor government has been misusing taxpayer dollars. That's why scrutiny and transparency is all the more important. And Victorians need to know why money was paid to an organisation that turned out to have a profitable year in that year. We certainly and strongly support the Australian Open. I want to be clear about that. But what we're also concerned about at a time where Victorians are going through a cost of living crisis and where Victorians deserve and are entitled to transparency and openness from the Allen Labor government, they're not getting it. And that's why we've expressed concerns about this $63 million payment. Let's also be clear. News about this $63 million payment from the Allen Labor government to Tennis Australia only became public because my office lodged a Freedom of Information request. And we shouldn't have to go to that length to get basic information about the use of money. The Allen Labor government should have disclosed this payment at the time. Victorians are entitled to know how their dollars are being used. Again, the Australian Open is a fantastic tournament. It is a great festival of Melbourne and Victoria. It showcases us to the rest of the world, and we support this tournament and we support Tennis Australia in what it's doing. But Victorians are also entitled to know how their money is being spent. And we've seen other examples of the use of money by the Allen Labor government where transparency has been denied the Victorian people. That's what we're on about today. That's what we're concerned about, more transparency from the Allen Labor government. I'll hand over to Sam now.
Thanks, JP. Well, I think you would struggle to find a stronger advocate and supporter of the Australian Open in both the Coalition Party room but also in the Parliament than myself. Obviously, I've had the privilege to play here at the Australian Open as a player but also work here before entering the Victorian Parliament on this event. It is an important event for our major events calendar, but what we need for our major events and for the calendar as a whole is a sustainable calendar, one where the major events represent not just good value for taxpayer money, but also a return on investment. And when you look at the Australian Open and Tennis Australia, as John mentioned, this event is commercially viable. It is a sustainable event on its own. If the government has nothing to hide, why did it take an FOI from the opposition leader's office to uncover the $63 million payment that was made to Tennis Australia on the back of the pandemic? The government can try and spin this any way they want. They don't know how to manage money. And at the moment, as we've seen on the negotiations with the Grand Prix in recent times, and now over $100 million being handed over to Tennis Australia, they cannot manage our major events.
While you're there,
Yep.
Sam, the government says that this has been part of locking the Australian Open in for an additional 10 years into the 2040s.
Yes.
Isn't that worth it in your eyes?
Look, let's be clear here. Tennis Australia owns this event. The Grand Slam here at Melbourne Park is not going anywhere. Of course, we need to keep seeing investment in Melbourne Olympic Parks, in the facilities around here. But we are talking about a payment that was supposedly made by the government on its own terms. Now, they can go and say it's because to keep the event here or spin it any way they want. By the FOI documents, it says it was a payment made to keep Tennis Australia solvent. It wasn't made as a payment to keep the event. It was made on their own account to keep this event solvent. This event is commercially viable and stands on its own 2 feet. We don't need to be handing taxpayer money over to commercially viable events.
And so you believe that forever it'll be here at Melbourne Park? There's no risk of us ever losing the Australian Open?
We need to keep investing, absolutely, as all governments here in Victoria have done for a long time, as the Coalition has previously done. We need to keep investing in our major events calendar, need to keep investing like we do in events like the Australian Open, but those investments also need to reflect value for money for the Victorian taxpayer, and we need to see a return on investment on those investments.
How much do you think, how many taxpayer dollars were paid to the Australian Open? We asked the Minister today and he said he would reveal it, documents have been signed, and he's not going to say how much it cost.
Well, if the Minister and the Treasurer and Jacinta Allen aren't going to reveal how much has been paid, I'm not sure how we're going to tell you how much has been paid. Look, we'll continue to try and fight and find every piece of information we can. But as we know, this government loves secrecy. They love trying to hide things in the cover-up, and we know they can't manage money. We see that not just across major events, but all major projects. We'll continue to do everything we can as an opposition to uncover just how much these events are costing. But until the government actually comes out and decides to tell us all, the Victorian taxpayer is going to continue to be kept in the dark.
Thank you. Well said, Sam. Questions on other issues?
Yeah,
Yep.
I asked you on this. What prompted the FOI? Had you heard that there was some kind of payment there? What prompted it?
We'd submitted the FOI. We were aware that the $40 million payment had been made, or the loan had been forgiven, but we had other concerns around what the Allen Labor government and before it the Andrews Labor government had been spending. So we lodge FOIs right across government because we can't trust the Allen Labor government and the Andrews government before her to be forthcoming with information. So we have to rely, for the most part, on freedom of information requests, and we shouldn't have to do that. Payments like this are significant, and as Sam said, a payment of this magnitude should have been made public at the time. There's no justification for withholding this from the people.
Do you worry that there could have been other payments that have been made to other organisations from the state government that the public don't know about at this stage around that COVID time?
We're almost certain that payments like this one to Tennis Australia have been made by the Allen Labor government to other organisations, but we're reliant on freedom of information requests because this government doesn't believe in transparency, and it certainly doesn't believe in making public payments of this magnitude. So it's up to people like myself and Sam and our colleagues to lodge freedom of information requests so we can try and find out how taxpayer dollars are being used.
It's fair to say the state government didn't make Tennis Australia's, time during that period easy. There were problems with players coming down and all sorts of things. Do you think that payment was paid to them as well in a way to keep them on side?
Look, I don't quite know the full length and breadth of the motivations that Daniel Andrews and Jacinta Allen might have had at the time. Our concern, as Sam has said, our concern is that a payment of this magnitude should have been made public. It's about secrecy and transparency and the need for more openness with the Victorian people, particularly at a time when our hospitals are suffering, our roads and schools are suffering, and people will wonder, well, where's all of our money being spent? And that's why transparency is so important.
Just on transparency with money, Jacinta Allen couldn't say how much today the Arden station cost as part of the $12 billion metro tunnel. Is that a breakdown the government should be able to give?
The Allen Labor government can't manage money, and it can't manage it, and it can't count either. We're seeing well over $35 billion now in cost blowouts on major projects. And the Allen Labor government can't be upfront with the Victorian people to tell us how much is being spent and how much is being blown in the form of waste and cost overruns at a time when our state is suffering from border to border. That Jacinta Allen can't disclose a basic figure around the cost of this station just shows how out of touch the Allen Labor government is with Victorians and what they're going through at a time of a cost of living crisis. The government should be able to account for every dollar that's spent on major projects, and for that matter, every other service that the Victorian government provides for the Victorian people. And we're seeing billions of dollars in cost overruns, and we've called for greater transparency and greater oversight of major projects, and the Allen Labor government continually ignores it because it knows that if we knew the full truth about the cost overruns, I think Victorians would be very concerned indeed.
Just quickly, John, what do you make of the excuse we've heard time and time again that they can't provide these figures because they're commercial in confidence? Is that appropriate for a state government?
It's not. Commercial in confidence has a part to play when you're in negotiations. But once contracts are committed, it is ridiculous for Jacinta Allen or anyone else in her government to maintain that we're not entitled to the truth about how major projects are going. We know from the Auditor General, the Parliamentary Budget Office, the Ombudsman, that so much of this has been driven by party politics inside the Labor Party. So taxpayers, Victorians, who are already doing it tough in a cost of living crisis, are seeing their dollars being squandered in cost overruns. Yes, major projects are important, but for the government to hide behind commercial in confidence is just unacceptable.
Do you have a commitment that you would not do or use the same practice if you were to be elected in 2026?
Yeah. We believe that commercial in confidence should play only a limited part in the tendering of major projects, and that as soon as it's possible to disclose these figures to the Victorian people, we believe that that should happen. What we've got under the Allen Labor government, though, is it's hiding basic facts from the Victorian people. Even with the Commonwealth Games, just to cite that as an example, you'll all recall that the terms of settlement were kept from the Victorian people and details around the negotiations when there was no commercial in confidence. So I cite that as just one example where commercial in confidence is being invoked when there's no justification for it. Once these projects are underway, there's no risk to commercial in confidence. And not only do the Victorian people deserve that information, but government can learn and improve contracting from project to project by greater transparency and greater oversight.
Should the money that was paid to Tennis Australia be paid back?
Well, I think that's a more complicated decision because the money was been paid. It's been paid on the terms on which the Victorian government gave that money. So we would be sympathetic with the idea that the Victorian government made that payment at the time. But as Sam has said and as I've said, what's really important here is transparency and scrutiny. And if you've got transparency as a key principle before and at the time payments like this are made, then you know that you've been accountable to the people you represent. And our concern with this secret payment was that it was withheld from the Victorian people weeks out from a state election. And if it had nothing to hide, then why was it fearful of disclosing that to the Victorian people? As we've said, Sam and I, all Victorians support this great event, the Australian Open, and we want it to continue to be a great success. But here, the principle at stake is transparency and scrutiny. Thank you very much. Cheers.
Thank you.